Well, it was $80,000 for that house. Okay, it was probably worth realistically 140, 150, maybe 125, but someplace much more than 80. And we had looked at homes, probably 40, 50 homes before we saw this. This had a full basement on the water with a boathouse, with a drive-in garage, with a pool, 4,000 square feet if you include the basement. When Kathy first walked into that house, in that foyer, her whole face lit up. Biggest smile you could imagine. She was home. This was where she wanted to live. The craftsmanship, the workmanship, the quality of the house, it was everything we were looking for in a house. And we had looked at a lot of houses, and this was it for her. She really liked this. When the DeFeos lived there, they had a little sign on it that said High Hopes. And what the prosecutors for the murder case wrote a book later on called High Hopes. We had the sign taken down before we moved in. The DeFeo family had placed in front of the house statues about a month, if I understand correctly, before the murders. Mr. DeFeo knew that something was wrong. He went to Canada, got statues made, brought them back, built these paths for them, and there were statues of the Holy Family. And then the murders took place in November of 1974. 6 rifle shots from a .36 caliber Marlin rifle were not heard by either neighbor on either side. No one heard the rifle shots. The murders were discovered the next day when the son that had committed the murders, Ronald DeFeo, came back to the house with some friends. It becomes apparent when you hear more and more about the family that they knew something was wrong but didn't really know how to talk about it to anyone else, let alone begin to explain it. It seems like evil won because we lost our house. Big deal. It took a while to get to the big deal part. It's only a house. We got to live. People before us didn't. People after us had life much worse that lived there. It's only a house. And we learned so much. Does it mean I would do it again if I was given the option? No, I wouldn't push that button, I don't think. I would do just about anything not to go through that again. These are the slides of the house itself, and these were taken on March 6, 1976, 2 months after we moved out of the house. We stayed there 28 days. The murders that had taken place in the house was a year before we had moved into the house and bought it. This is the very front of the house facing. The street would be right behind us, and the river would be to the back. This is looking down the side. The garage is there, and attached to the garage is the boathouse where we kept our boat. Over the time we were in the house, I would wake up in the middle of the night, sometime between 3 and 3:30, usually sometime around 3:15. And often I would check on the kids or check on the doors, whatever, just walk around, and the boathouse door, the side door, would be open. One of the things that was important to us was our boat. It was a major investment. So I would always be sure that it was closed, and I would get out in the middle of the night and go down there and have to close the thing. This is back towards the dining room doors on the left, and the kitchen would be on the right on the first floor. Worst room in the house, according to most people, was the second floor window on the right. That would be the sewing room. That would be the room that shouldn't be inhabited by anyone. Best room on the left, right next to it. This was a grotto that had a statue of the Blessed Virgin in it. We had that taken out when we had the other statues taken down. They didn't take the grotto. That was my beer can. This is Ed Warren and Jerry Salfin. Jerry's from Duke University, from the Psychical Research Institute there. He was an investigator that came up when the investigators came in March 6, 1976. Ed Warren headed up the investigation. And this is them having a bit of a discussion before they went on in. There's a house, one of the houses across the street. You can see the kind of neighborhood it is. This is Lorraine Warren, Ed's wife, and Ed. And these two fellows are from the New York Psychical Research Institute. And that's Dr. Carlos Osis on the left and Dr. Tannhaus in the middle, a kind of strange-looking guy. Dr. Tannhaus levitated about 2 feet off the ground when he first walked in the house. He told Ed Warren that. It's on tape. Then a few years later, they were all on a TV station doing interviews, and these guys denied even being in the house, said they weren't even there. It became fashionable not to be associated with this when so much controversy came up and people started calling it a hoax. This is one of the cameramen from Channel 5 News that also came in to record the whole day. He eventually had to quit at one point. He experienced what's known as tachycardia and had to go sit down. They were in the middle of a seance and it got a little bit too exciting for a little while, and then he came back. Years later, he didn't talk about that or wouldn't admit to it, but Laura DeDeo, who was a reporter for Channel 5, still tells the story in her own words. So the house was pretty full to be investigated that day with a lot of people, no children or anything like that, but full day of adults that are interested in this kind of thing, and they were there to make their own determinations. My wife and my family and I were not there. We just gave them the keys and said, you know, you tell us what you think. This is Ed and Lorraine Warren finding our family Bible. This is part of the front living room. This is just, as you see the house, we did not go back for these furnishings. They were eventually auctioned off the following July. I got a trunk that my grandfather had made for me, a chest, and the van that we owned and left the house in had my boat towels from my boat. We had like these blue towels that said Smokey on them. Those still have those. Still wash my cars with those. The clothes were donated and the food was donated to the Salvation Army. Friends of ours went in on Easter Sunday and took everything out that was donatable. This is on the second floor landing going up. She's holding a rosary in her right hand that was blessed by Padre Pio, if I remember correctly, and the significance of that will come in another photograph. This is the front, what we call the sunroom. This is the very front of the house. The street would be to our right. And this is a moose head that was my grandfather's from upstate New York. If you look on the ear of the moose, you'll see on the horn a little head. And if you look on the ear, you may see another face. It's said to be a likeness of Padre Pio, who's now Saint Pio. The significance is more that that's what Lorraine, who Lorraine was praying to before she went in the house, whose rosary she was holding, and who she had asked to come and be protection for them or with them that day. Padre Pio had the stigmata, the 5 wounds of Christ that openly bled for 50 years and 3 days. He died in 1968. He was noted for, from the time he was a child, being attacked. His family moved him into a separate building. They could not live with him. He would come and be attacked every night. And then they would find this room wrecked, and they would find him with a pillow under his head, and his mother would say to him what happened, and he would say, This lady came and put the pillow under my head and told what was here to leave. If you swore in the same room as he was, he would run away and cover his ears. When he was a child, he couldn't even allow himself to hear such things. He was an extraordinary individual. He was documented so many times as bilocating, being two places at the same time. He hated evil, and I believe that's one of the reasons why the Warrens had a special fondness for him. This was Missy's room. This was considered the best room in the house. She had an imaginary friend, what we considered imaginary friend then, that she called Jody. And Jody had the ability to appear to her as a very large pig, a very small pig, a little boy. It was one of those things you put down to as a kid's imagination. Over the years, we learned that Jody wasn't so much imagination. First thing I saw was actually seeing something moving in Missy's room when I was coming back from the boathouse. When I got back in the house and got upstairs, Kathy was still asleep. I had gone out to check the boat. I had gone out to check on why the boathouse door was open again. And I saw someone, adult size, moving around in Missy's room. That was quite disturbing, because I had no way to know what that was. And you start to one of the things that happens with these kinds of things is you start to question your own senses, what you're seeing. You question what you're thinking. Doubts slowly creep in to your mind. You become unsure of that which was always taken for granted. I saw it, so it had to be. And yet there's no way to explain that kind of... But when you add small things to it, Kathy being touched from behind, the door slamming and no evidence of that, the clock radio going off, the boathouse door opening at night, something walking around Mrs. room, the gelatin, the different sounds that would happen at different times, then you really do start to question your own sanity at some point. You do start to have these conversations with yourself about what's going on here. We would have friends come over and visit, and we'd sit around in the kitchen, and there'd be noises up overhead walking. Well, when you have other people coming into your house and telling you you're not crazy, you start questioning this. And the more you question it, the more things you learn, and maybe you shouldn't learn those things. We had one friend that came in and said, you should go through the house and bless the house yourself. You should go through each room, open a window, say the Lord's Prayer, tell whatever's there to leave. It'll go. Well, we did that a couple times. That didn't work. It got worse. More noises, more smells, more drips from the door handles. We would be lying in bed and we'd hear the front door, which was a very distinct sound, slam shut. Go run downstairs to see what it was. Dog's asleep right by the door. It wasn't the door, but it was that sound. This was a lion, a ceramic lion that my wife Kathy had given me, and we actually threw this out at one point, and it came back into the house on its own. It was there the next day again inside. Kids said they didn't bring it in. It would kind of move around when you weren't watching it. You would leave the room, no one else would be in there. You'd go out of the house, you'd come home, it would have moved. Sometimes just a little bit, sometimes it would change rooms. We tried to get rid of it, it didn't exactly work out. Some of you remember the red room from the movie? Well, this was actually red. There's a bookcase here in front of it. Kathy found it one day when she was putting things away. She called me at my office and said, you won't believe what I just found, a room behind a bookcase. Our dog Harry, who was a black lab, would not go here. He would not go in this part of the house. There were smells that came from here. It smelled like open sewer pipe most of the time, but not always. This is the third floor looking down to the first floor. The attorney for Ronald DeFeo once told us a story of a fellow by the name of Bear. Fell off this railing, fell down to the first floor foyer, got up and walked out. Do we know whether that's true or not? No, we weren't there. It's just a story. The boys' room on the third floor. My boy Danny, yeah, the window, when we were blessing the house, one of the things, remember we opened the window and say the Lord's Prayer first and then tell us there to leave. Yes, his fingers were flattened. They actually were so flat that there was no doubt he had to go to the hospital. By the time we got him dressed and went to go to the hospital, his fingers were fine. I don't talk about what the boys experienced except in very general. They're adults now. It's their story. What they choose to tell about what happened to them is up to them. And I think it's improper for me to take that upon me. Okay? They were glad to leave. This is the basement. And that's Ed Warren checking out, see how much food we left behind. Jerry's looking into the master bedroom. This is the second floor. And these are pictures that were taken with an infrared film, was set up on a tripod, on a timer. It's not someone standing here with a camera now. These are just automatic pictures. So every once in a while, this flash would go off and it would just take a picture of this area. It's a little boy looking out of the room, as near as we can tell. When we asked Missy if she knew who this was, she said, yes, that's Jody. He would come and play with me. Missy's the only one that ever saw this little boy. Except for Kathy's sister-in-law, did see a little boy in that room one night. He was blue. He didn't look like this. So we're not even sure it was the same entity. This is the master bedroom. The quilt you see is a pattern that Kathy worked on with velvet, different colors of velvet, for a little over a month before we moved in. And she had just the right amount of fabric and just the right way to get this to work out in this pattern. And she kept fighting it and it kept coming back to this pattern. Years later, we were told that it is very similar to the kind of bedspread that's used during Lent only in Louisiana area. Just an interesting idea. I have no way to know whether that's really true or not. But. This is considered the worst room in the house. This is the second floor back next to Missy's room. We used it as a sewing room. When Father Ray went through blessing the house, this is the room that he was told to get out of the house from. 2 boys of the family that were there were killed in this room. And this is where the flies would appear on the windows and stay. And they would go and come. They weren't always there. That was the crucifix on the wall there to her right that was downstairs before. That was our boat. We left the boat behind. It was auctioned off. The fellow that bought it was a cop. He eventually got divorced. The boat caught fire. Wasn't a good story. This is Kathy in the process of getting a lie detector test. We were asked when the movie came out if we would do this. We were told that if we failed them, they would make that public. If we passed them, they would make that public. That same day, we did the Merv Griffin show, and the results were done, but they didn't make them public. So it could have been on the Merv Griffin show, but it wasn't. Eventually it came out in the National Star. It's Michael Rice taking her test. That's Chris Gugas. He was the number 2 guy in the world at that point for the polygraph. He had taught in the Department of Defense, the Second World War, set up the law department, or the police department actually, in Greece right after the end of World War II. Had written a book about the polygraph and all his different tests that he had done. And years ago, he was a seminary student, and after he took our exams, then he went back to reading his Bible again. I know who these guys are. That's Jim Brolin. Margot Kidder didn't want anything to do with us. We met Jim Brolin a number of times, but Margot Kidder didn't want anything to do with publicity, or she didn't believe in this. She did the movie and disappeared. She thought the movie was kind of beneath her, but she was under contract. We all know what's happened to her since, but we all wish her well. I was asked to do and write an introduction last year for a piece, and the piece is about a particular part of the Amityville horror. And I started to, when I sat down to write this, I started to try to explain to someone what it was like to go to California. And a week after being there, go down to a new car dealer and buy a car, instead, because we had been renting one for a week and we wanted to own one instead. We decided we were going to live there. And I'm sitting in the showroom waiting for the finance papers and the insurance papers and the car to be prepped, and Kathy's there and the kids are there, and we have a house full of all of our stuff back in New York. We have lived through something that we don't understand, and all we know is that we're glad to try to start over somewhere else. And the traffic is good. It's a beautiful sunny day in Southern California. It's springtime. It's a week after Mother's Day, 1976. And the traffic's going on in Mission Circle out on Highway 8. And the commerce is going on inside the Chevy dealership, just like a normal day anywhere. And I'm sitting there realizing that what I've been through I can't explain to someone else, and if I tried to, they would never look at me the same. I would become something different to them. A wacko, someone who they are sorry they started a conversation with, whatever. But I realized that I've been through something I really can't explain to myself, let alone to someone else. And there's that feeling of aloneness or alienation, as I term it, that I could, as I said before, I could try to explain the process, but it would take so long, and I'm not sure I would be able to even communicate it so that you would have a sense of it as I do.